Hi everyone and welcome back to the Alternate Reality Network. I'm going to be your host for today, Tuburger84. Now today I'm going to be taking a really deep inside look at loot boxes. Now some of you have probably heard that term before. If you're a gamer, I know you definitely know what that is. So perhaps for you want to skip towards the end. But for everyone else, we're going to take a really hard look at what these things are. Because you can find them on your mobile phone, your kids might be playing them, they might be tucked away, hidden behind some sort of very fancy game casing at your local video game store. So we're going to talk about what they are, where you can find them, and I guess having a look at some of the conversations that are happening worldwide right now about some of the possible side effects or outcomes that if we leave loot boxes in their current state could actually go on to affect greater society as a whole going forward. So without any further ado, let's get straight into this. Now for those of you that have never heard of the term loot boxes before, they probably sound innocent enough. They probably sound like something you would find in a video game. Some sort of magical chest full of infinite possibilities and untold riches. But the truth is, when you open that box, a leprechaun jumps out, punches you in the junk, and then runs away with your lunch money. See, the reality is, in video games, loot boxes are a cancer. And just like any of the worst cancers, they're spreading fast. Now, where exactly this tumor originated is a point of debate. Many people point back to the MMO game ZT Online, which was a video game released in China back in 2006 as Patient Zero for loot boxes. Now, it doesn't really matter where it originated, because if you look at the statistics in 2018, this is now a $33 billion industry. And if left unchecked, they are predicting that by 2022, that loot boxes will be worth worldwide something in the ballpark of over $50 billion. This transformation of microtransactions has been nothing but swift and epic in scale. Now, for those of you that don't know what a microtransaction is, it basically refers to smaller in-game purchases that you have the option to buy within a video game, whether it be on a mobile phone, whether it be on a computer or a console, after you have already purchased the main game. Now, a lot of these games are now launched for free on the internet, and the way those companies now make their money is exactly via these microtransactions. Now, microtransactions haven't always been in the form of loot boxes. You see, once upon a time, microtransactions were no different than walking into any sort of department store. You would look over, you would see an item on a shelf that you liked, you would check the price tag, and if you liked it for that much money, you bought it and you got exactly what you wanted. Now, what's changed with loot boxes is that now, instead of you being able to look at the case, reach into the item and pull out exactly what you want, they've basically filled up this box of pretty much rubbish, and they hide exactly the thing that you want or need right down in the bottom. And you reach in blindly after you've paid your money, you pull out something, and you hope it is exactly what you need. To give you an idea of exactly how far the odds can work against you in these games, let's use the example of Marvel Strike Force. Now, Marvel Strike Force is a very popular game that you can find on mobile phones and uses the Marvel characters that you see in the movies, which is something that's marketed very heavily to children. Now, it has recently been acquired by Disney, who is supposed to be a family-friendly, very wholesome company. But to try and get the most powerful upgrade in the game, there is only one way to get it, and that is via loot boxes. And to get that most powerful upgrade, the chances of you getting it is 0.05%. So that would mean if the odds were indeed correct, you would have to roll 2,000 times of this dice to get exactly the thing that you needed. Now, when it takes you $5 to $10 US per roll of the dice, that can very quickly add up to those people who have problems mitigating their spending in these video games, whether it be people with a vulnerability to gambling addiction, or whether it be perhaps children. Now, I know many of you have probably already put together where I'm going here, but loot boxes sound remarkably like something you may have heard of before. See if you can pick it. You see, I take my money, I predict a future outcome of something, and I basically bet that I'm going to get the thing that I want for that money. Sound familiar? By almost any definition in any dictionary on planet Earth, loot boxes are indeed gambling. So the question is, with this industry that has been growing so rapidly, with video game companies putting this in more and more and more video games and locking almost all progress in some cases behind these new paywalls, why hasn't anyone done anything about it? And that's pretty much a conversation that is happening right now within governments all around the world. You see every day more and more complaints from people that have seen these things in action, that have seen loot boxes affect friends, family, or their children. They've made more and more complaints to governments around the world, to the point that we now have the United States, the United Kingdom. There are 14 signatories within the European Union that are now looking at investigating loot boxes. And also, which I'm very glad to hear, in my home country of Australia. Because no one really knows what these things are. Because no one really can identify whether or not these things are gambling. Because whenever this comes up, whenever someone says, hang on, this sounds exactly like a slot machine. This sounds exactly like a poker machine. How is this not illegal in things that are being sold to children? And the defense is coming from one place and one place only. And that is from the people that make these video games. And the reasons they give are always identical of why they believe these things are not gambling. So to give you one example of this defense, last year in 2018, Mr. Andrew Wilson, who was the CEO of EA Games, a company that many players have been critical of over the last couple of years, especially after the way they did loot boxes in a game called Star Wars Battlefront 2. Now, Mr. Wilson said during a financial call that he did not believe that the loot boxes they had in their FIFA games, for example, were indeed gambling because of two reasons. Number one, he quoted that the players always received a very specific amount of items whenever they opened a loot box or a pack, whatever they called them in that game. Now, what he of course forgot to include in that is that in many cases, the items that the players received were not what they wanted. Now, the other thing he went on to say, and this is a defense that we hear all the time of loot boxes from gaming companies, is that technically these items have no real world value. And that is to say that you cannot sell these items, okay, for real money, because these are blocked within the accounts. You cannot trade them to anywhere else. Therefore, it can't be gambling because you have no opportunity for financial gain. Now, it's a phenomenal defense because when you think about it, they're saying these things have no monetary value. And that's right up until they sell them to you. Because at that point, it might be worth $5 as a microtransaction. Or in games like Marvel Strike Force that we just talked about earlier, a microtransaction, there's really nothing micro about them anymore because they can go right up to in excess of 100 or even 150 US dollars. So it's a phenomenal defense to say that they are not worth real money when they just sold them to you. To summarize that more concisely, these are the two reasons. Number one, they don't have real world value, therefore they can't be deemed as gambling. Number two, you always get something for your money. These are always the things that you hear when video games are being summoned before governments around the world to explain themselves. So before we go into some of the outcomes and some of the ongoing conversations that are being had by these governments, let's take a step back and have a look at some of the evidence that's actually being presented in the field. Because there are many experts out there right now that are researching, are there possible side effects from having gambling or poker slot machine style systems within video games that could potentially affect the outcomes for children? Or on the other side, does it have any links between people who may have issues with problem gambling? Now, I was very fortunate that recently, Dr. David Zendle agreed to speak with me via Skype. Now, this gentleman, if you don't know his name, I really hope that you look him up because he's a very fascinating individual. And when you see these conversations happening at governmental levels all around the world, it is quite often his research that they are discussing to try and work out whether action needs to be taken against loot boxes. So I'll let Dr. Zendle explain to you a little bit about exactly what his most recent study was about.
So what I've done in my research is I basically got out there and I've asked groups of gamers, many gamers have volunteered loads of their time to take part in these studies. I've asked them how much money they're spending on loot boxes, and then I've used a standard measure of problem gambling. I've basically say, how much are you spending? How bad's your problem gambling? And problem gambling is like an excessive and disordered engagement with gambling activities that causes like really severe harm to the person who's engaging with it. It's linked to depression and anxiety and drug abuse and bankruptcy and all kinds of bad things. So we measure people spending on loot boxes, and we measure their problem gambling as well. And what we found consistently, basically, no matter who we talk to, there's a link. The more you spend on loot boxes, the worse your problem gambling is. What we haven't figured out yet is why that's the case. Now, like, it might be that that link is there. The more you spend on loot boxes, the worse your problem gambling is, because like spending on the loot box is literally causing problem gambling. So you spend money on loot boxes. They're very gambling-like. They're very slot machine-like. You get used to expecting the excitement of that randomized reward you get from the loot box. Yeah. And then you go out into the real world and you see a slot machine and you're like, this is just exactly the same. So you start engaging in gambling behavior. Hence, loot boxes cause problem gambling. But it might be the opposite way as well. Like, so problem gamblers are people who have disordered excessive engagement in gambling activities that's often not within their voluntary control. So when they playing one of their favorite video games and suddenly something comes up that is psychologically so similar to a slot machine, because of their pre-existing gambling problems, they spend excessively on that. They spend loads of money on that. But in either case, it's kind of suggestive that harm may be going on.
Now, rather than summarize our whole interview in this video, I'm going to post a link to it below in the description. So please make sure you listen to the whole thing. He is a very, very charismatic guy. He makes some fantastic points, and the research that he does is invaluable to our society. But basically, if you continue to hear about his research, it points to one thing. And that is, in a very large study of gamers who have also been spending or exposed to video games, that through the surveys and through the research that he did, it showed that players who spend on these loot boxes and players who spend more and more on these loot boxes, you tend to find a very, very strong link between people who have had issues with problem gambling and people who spend very, very large amounts on loot boxes. Now, he also says in his own words that they don't necessarily know whether it's a chicken or an egg situation on either side. Was it people who had problem gambling issues can't help themselves with loot boxes? Or are loot boxes indeed perhaps creating problem gamblers? On that particular topic, we don't have a definitive answer, but it is a question that is absolutely worth asking. Could loot boxes perhaps expose these vulnerable people to significant harm? Because obviously the difference between this and poker machine regulations in places like Australia is that there are no spending caps, there is no monitoring, and there is no regulation. So a person could, in theory, put themselves heavily in debt through a mobile phone video game with absolutely no mitigations or systems against them. Now, on the other side of things, are we creating new problem gamblers? Okay, from people that have been exposed to video games. Now, I'm gonna let you listen to one more clip from Dr. Zendle's interview with myself, because it makes a really fascinating point. Now, he talks about some of his colleagues who have been researching loot boxes and perhaps looking at how just psychologically similar that loot box systems are to poker-style slot machines.
So there's a really, so these two people from where you're from, actually, one from New Zealand, one from Australia, called Drummond and Sauer. I'm not sure if I ever pronounced Sauer's name right, S-A-U-E-R. And they wrote a super neat paper where they basically said, look, there are these specific psychological criteria that are well known in the gambling literature that differentiate gambling from other behaviors. And if something has these qualities, then it is psychologically the same as gambling. Don't care about your laws, don't care about your technicalities. We're talking about the mind, what is analogous psychologically to gambling rather than like what's in your specific law book. And they basically went through a bunch of loot boxes in different games, and they said, oh, actually, these specific loot boxes in these specific games tick all the criteria to be psychologically considered the same as gambling. And maybe you should think about regulating them. So yeah, we've got a theory of why loot boxes might be linked to gambling. We've got some data that says they're linked to gambling too now. And like this data, every time you run the study, you get the same response, which is really good evidence that this is a real thing in the world. Every time we measure problem gambling and we measure loot box spending, regardless of whether we're doing it on micro workers on Amazon Mechanical Turk from the USA, regardless of whether we're doing it on adolescents from the UK, regardless of whether we're doing it on a broad sample of 7,000 gamers, we get this link. It exists. We just don't know if it's because loot boxes cause problem gambling or if problem gambling makes you spend more money on loot boxes. Like, so there's something there.
And to hear how psychologically similar that loot boxes and the way that they operate and gambling poker machines and slot machines and the way they function being so similar is a terrifying premise. Now, I know that obviously having risk to adults is something that is very, very serious, especially those people that do not have the ability to control their own gambling impulses. But one conversation that we need to have, and of course the world needs to have, is about loot boxes and children. Because of course children make up a very, very large proponent of people who play mobile video games these days. And of course, mobile games is where you will find these particular sets of loot boxes the most prevalent. So to talk about some of the research that's being done, if you look at the 2018 Gambling Commission report over in the United Kingdom, they found that the amount of children who were identified as having a problem with gambling between the ages of 11 and 16, they found that this number over a 2-year period had quadrupled. Now, they didn't draw a definitive line in the sand and say that loot boxes were definitely the cause for this. They actually recommended that research needed to be done into the possible outcomes of loot boxes. But 13% of those children involved in this research did discuss that they had played some sort of online gambling game, something like an online poker or online blackjack. But 31% of them had played video games and had interacted themselves with loot boxes when they answered this research. Now, as to exactly what caused these increases in numbers of gambling problem children is not clear, but more research has to be done into it, considering how prevalent loot boxes are now within video games. To say that this may be a part of it is definitely not understanding the fact. But the real concern is this: if we know that the psychological links or the psychological similarities in the way that your brain responds to what you see in a video game loot box opening into what you see when you play a slot machine, what happens when children reach the age of 18 or 21, depending on when in the world they might be, and they wander into a casino? You know, is there a pathway where perhaps that child's brain is predisposed to knowing that if I play that thing, I know that I'm gonna feel something. I'm gonna get a dopamine surge. I'm gonna feel good if I get a win. We need to find out. We need to know, and the research has to continue. And these conversations have to keep happening to find out whether there is a real danger of us creating more and more people who have gambling issues in their adult lives. And we need to start that right now before these children get exposed to it any more than they have. Now, there may be some of you that are wondering, if these things are so horrible, if the research is showing that there really, really could be, although it's still not defined yet, but if there even could be the chance that these outcomes are real, that these negative things could happen, why are they there? Why haven't people gotten rid of them? Now, the funny thing is, if you ask almost any video gamer out there, there are very, very few people who even want these systems in their video games. If you ask any of them, they would purely say that if there were items in a microtransaction store within a game, that they just want to buy them. They just want to buy the thing that they want. They don't want to open these loot boxes. They know how much of a ripoff they are. They know that they are bad for the gaming community. So why are they there? Who's even defending these things? And that's the thing. It is the gaming companies and the bodies that represent the gaming companies. Like in the US, the ESA is a group that is hired to always talk to the ESRB, who is the people who basically looks at the guidelines for what you can and what you can't have in video games in Northern America, to make sure that they do not shut this down. Because remember, they have a huge financial stake in this. I mean, $30 billion, or in 2022, over $50 billion. That is not something that they can walk past lightly. But if you look at it from a governmental perspective, this is where things are going to be even more challenging for people who do not like the potential risk that these things have, are going to run into when we try and remove them. And that is that $30 billion is a lot of taxable income. So there are going to be some countries that are going to try and counterbalance the pros and the cons. Is it worth having some more gambling addicts so we can make some more money on tax? Now, while that sounds like an absolutely morally bankrupt and corrupt practice, it is. But unfortunately, that is some of the conversations that are being had, and why in many, many cases up until this point in time, governments seem to have shied away from trying to put any sorts of regulation in there. Now, in the last couple of years, the governments have started to step up. And in many cases, they're firing a message across the bow, basically saying this: look, we don't necessarily know what these loot boxes are. We don't necessarily know what they're doing, but we're looking into it. So you have an opportunity now. Look into this yourself, regulate yourself, and perhaps we will not need to step in and regulate. But if we do find out that these products can do harm to people, especially harm to children, you're going to give us no choice but to step in. And some countries have done exactly that already. So the Netherlands has already stepped in and started to look at loot boxes, and they banned any style of loot box that currently has the ability to be traded or sold, such as keys that were used in the game Dota 2 to open other chests that you could trade to other players for real life money. So those have been outlawed. Now, what gaming companies also now have to do in the Netherlands is that they have to remove the items from loot boxes that make them psychologically similar to video game slot machines, or to real life slot machines, I should say, such as the bright, shiny lights and the very dopamine friendly sounds that you get when you open a loot box that had a win. Now, the other thing they have to do is prove that the loot boxes they have put into games are safe when it comes to being exposed to children. Now, how they do that still remains unclear at this stage, but it's still a fantastic step in the right direction. Now, last year in 2018, Belgium joined the party. They went a little bit further. Now, they actually banned a slew of different styles of loot box gambling, and many large companies, including EA and also Blizzard, had to remove their loot box products from their games. Now, not only did they go as far as banning a lot of these, they went one step further. That if they found a gaming company to continue down the road of still having loot boxes in their games, that they would be enforcing fines of over 800,000 euros. And for the individual CEOs of these companies, they would actually have up to 5 years jail time if they were caught peddling these styles of loot boxes. Now, this may sound extreme, but from me personally, I think this is a fantastic step. Because remember, there is nothing that is positive about loot boxes for the people who play the games. The only positive is for the companies that make massive, unregulated profits from other people's potential pain. Now, conversations are still ongoing in a lot of countries. So this year in the US, this has now gone even further, being looked at by the FTC, which is a spectacularly positive sign for a lot of us. You also have the Australian Senate in Australia is discussing it right now. And then we have many signatories in the EU who are joining together for some investigations right now into whether or not they need to either ban or perhaps put some regulations on video games going forward. Now, the video game companies, of course, are not taking it lying down. There are legal challenges. The ESA is ramping up their rhetoric, saying that players really want to see these loot boxes. They are fun. They are fantastic. I mean, only this week, we saw one of the PR people from Fox Next, who are the people that make that Marvel Strike Force game that I've been talking about, come out on Polygon and try and tell the community how much they love this particular thing. When most of the overwhelming evidence for the loot boxes, if you read Reddit or social media posts or Discord forums, tells us that everyone knows that you cannot progress in that game without being screwed over by these particular loot box systems. So the signs are looking good. We've already seen some companies start to self-regulate and even back down. So EA, for example, they did put loot boxes in their recent game Apex, but they did not put it in what was supposed to be their bigger AAA title, although it has failed spectacularly this year, which was Anthem. So now we're seeing companies start to be a little bit more cautious, which is a fantastic sign that we may be headed in the right direction. But that doesn't mean that the fight is over. In fact, it is only just starting. And for many people, looking at this absolute monolith, at this absolute gigantic wall that trying to tear down loot boxes is in front of us. But if you really, really do not like this mechanic, if you really, really want them to be gone from video games, there is no better time than now to make your voice heard. So right now I'm going to talk about 5 different ways or 5 different things that right now you can make your voice heard, and that you can make sure that together we can try and help loot boxes in their current potentially harmful format can be removed from video games forever. So number 1, if you are a parent of a child who plays any form of video game, and I mean any form, even right down to Angry Birds on a mobile phone, please check the box or the description in the app on the phone store to check for microtransactions or loot boxes. And if they have them, what you can do is you can simply not allow your child to be exposed to that game if after reading the research that I've discussed today, you've decided that they could be potentially harmful. Now, whether you want to take one step further and make sure that you say to the clerk, I do not want to purchase this video game, it has potential gambling in it. Whether you leave a review for that particular company's game and say, I'm not comfortable purchasing this product because I believe it may have gambling in this game. These are options that you can take right now, which are very small. And if you are concerned by this, it encourages these companies to look into these particular practices and perhaps reevaluate. Number 2, writing to your local governmental representative. Now, most of the time, I know many of us spending our time pretty much ragging on the governments all around the world. We feel like in many cases, they don't necessarily do the things that are in our best interest. They only look after themselves. Well, right now, these people are wanting to be re-elected. There are elections happening all around the world. And gambling is a platform that many politicians like to look like they are against. And right now, if you write a letter to your local governmental representative saying that you have very, very significant concerns about the possible side effects that video games could be having on our children or on those people that are vulnerable in our society, that you really want them as a governmental body, as a representative for your community, to look into this in a much higher level. Now, I know this sounds like a lot of effort, but let me save you most of the effort. I've already gone ahead and written a template. You can change this in any way that you want, and I've attached it in the description for this video below. Now, all you need to do is print it out, sign it, and then scan it and email it down to your local representative. If you want to lick a stamp and do it the old-fashioned way, all the power to you. But this is one particular opportunity that we have to make our governments work for us to remove something bad, not just from video games, but bad for people in general. Number 3, putting pressure on the companies that publish these games, and more specifically, their parent companies. Now, right now, we live in what a lot of people are calling the age of outrage. The people are outraged constantly. They're always mad about something. Well, right now, I want you to harness that anger, and instead of using it for bad, let's use it for some good. Now, what you have the opportunity to do is to find out who the publisher that makes these games, especially the worst case offenders, and basically see what we can do with their parent companies to bring awareness to what level of gambling is actually occurring within the game. Because in many cases, the parent company doesn't know. Let's look at an example where this has been done very successfully before. A few years ago, Star Wars Battlefront 2 was released by publisher EA Games. Now, Star Wars was licensed to them directly from Disney. Now, Mickey Mouse, again, they do not like the perception of being, gambling friendly. So what happened is when the outrage culture hit this and people were bombarding Reddit and Twitter and Instagram and anywhere that they were promoting that particular game, the community stepped up and they said, no, there is gambling, all progression is locked in behind gambling, this is terrible, we want it gone. And they won because Disney called EA and basically said, look, well, we don't know exactly what they said, but we're assuming the conversation was something to the tune of, we want the gambling gone or you can kiss your license goodbye. Now, we actually have a game that is quite fun to play and does not have that style of microtransactions in there. It's fantastic. Now, to give you an idea of what I'm doing right now, so Marvel Strike Force, you've probably noticed already, is one of the worst offenders of loot boxes that I have ever seen. Almost all progression is locked behind loot boxes. So I've already identified via social media 3 individuals quite high up in Disney, especially those that are more in the licensing and video game side of things. And I'm going to be tweeting and emailing them directly, not only my concerns about their video game and the horrendous odds against getting the things that you want, but also providing links to this video, the interview with Dr. Zendle, and the research that shows that loot boxes can be horrendously bad for people who play them. And if they could please look into what this company is doing with those. Now, if you've seen a game that you believe has stepped over the line, I would very much love it if you were to step up, reach out to those parent companies and apply pressure to tell them, look, this makes me not want to support things that your company does, because I can't in good conscience give money to a publisher that I believe is doing the bad thing for the community. Number 4, we need to support and be flexible with the publishers that are making these games. Now, I know what you're thinking. Wait, wasn't number 3 the complete opposite of this? Not quite. Now, if you're a gaming publisher and you've watched up until this point, thank you, but you probably think that I hate you. And the truth is that I don't. I love you. Video games have been such a massive part of my life that I'm very passionate about them. I mean, I'm making a video this long just because of my passion for them, for God's sake. Now, the thing is, I know that gaming needs to be more profitable than it was before microtransactions, because the average cost for video games has not gone up worldwide in a very, very long time. But conversely, the teams it takes to make these video games has increased, the budgets that it takes to make these video games has increased, and the time pressures, because people are so hungry and consume these games so fast, are higher than they've ever been on gaming publishers. So if we're sitting here going, gambling is bad, we want it out of video games, burn everything down, we still want to play our games. So we need to be able to work with the gaming publishers and say to them, give us other options, give us things that we want to buy. If you paint a really sexy skin on a Spider-Man character or a Transformer or whatever it is, and it's different and it looks cool, I love playing this game, I love the company that makes it, I want to financially support them, I personally, for something like cosmetics, would spend money on a game and a publisher I believe in, because it doesn't affect the outcome of the game, there's no gambling to it, I can see something in the store and I can buy it. Now, if the items of those microtransactions increases in price from what they used to be to make it more viable, perhaps that's an option. Perhaps the recommended retail price of video games increases to put more of what they're trying to get within the base cost of the video game, meaning that they have safer, more predictable profits. And they're not having to rely on gambling to hit these markets that are being pushed on them by these new CEOs who are obviously from more traditional methodology of business, which is all about the almighty dollar. Because at the end of the day, if these gaming studios close, we have no video games to play, and then I have no videos to make like this. Now, I hate the gambling aspect, but I love the game. So we need to be flexible, we need to be willing to work with gaming companies to find something that we're happy to pay for, to make sure that they continue to be successful, but while doing so with the right moral compass. Number 5, share the message and build awareness. Now, I don't really mind how you do it. I don't really mind whether you share this video, which would be great. I don't really mind whether you share the interview that I have with Dr. Zendle, which listens to an expert, not this Australian Gandalf idiot that you've been listening to so far. I don't mind whether you share the research that I have linked included in the notes. I don't mind if you do your own research. I don't mind if you go on a Facebook rant, a selfie rant on Instagram, whatever it's going to be. Get the word out. Tell your friends, tell your family, this is what a loot box is. It might be gambling. Are your kids playing it? Are you playing it? You have a gambling issue. You should probably not play these things. Whoever you tell, we need to make sure that people are aware that gambling is on your mobile phones. Gambling is hidden behind cartoons, behind Disney characters, behind superheroes. They are right there in front of your face. All you need to do is open that phone app, and probably 20 out of the top 50 games that you see there are going to have these things in them. Now, if you choose to still play them after knowing that they're in there, all the power to you. But if you are a parent and you have no idea what your kids are playing right now, and after reading this research for yourself, you don't have to take my word for it. Just because I have the beard doesn't mean I actually am an all-knowing wizard. Then if you decide that your kids should not be playing those games, at least then you can make an informed decision as to what happens next. So please share the words. If you didn't know what a loot box was today, perhaps your neighbor doesn't either. So let's spread the information and continue this conversation going forward. So those are 5 different things. I mean, there are other things that you may think are a better idea. There are things out there that you may think may work incredibly more. So if you would like to continue this discussion, please make sure you do so down below, because we can work together on this. Now, it may sound like a monumental task. I know. It's a $30 billion industry that some idiot in a basement is trying to ask you to take on right now. But nothing happens if no one does anything, okay? If you are someone that wishes there was something better for gamers, if you are someone that wishes there was something that was safer for our children, now's the time to act. So thank you very much for watching this special episode. Make sure you check out the website, alternatereality.com. It's going to be live very, very soon. We have quite a range of podcasts and everything on there, as well as YouTube channels. I appreciate your time. I'm Chuburger84, and I very much hope to see you again. Cheers.